So, rah-rah. This morning, our first speaker is Mary Shihimo. Oh, no, this is John Conlan. Poor Mary got in touch with me 2 days ago. She had fallen down her steps, fractured her collarbone, had a concussion, and I said, okay, you get a pass. Okay. I said, what about taking a Percocet and driving? And she was like, no, I don't want to do that. But I'd like to introduce Mr. John Conlan. God love him, stepped in at the last minute. Let me give you his background. Sure. I'm good at this. John and his wife Lorraine have dual Irish United States citizenship, and they have been traveling back and forth 20-some years to Ireland, at least. He has researched the Robert Emmet Literary Association, and John is also a host of the Celtic music program, The Rocky Road to Dublin, which airs on Butte Community Radio Station, KBMF, 102.5 FM, as well as he does a history series. The Harp Without the Crown is John's presentation this morning. Welcome all. Thank you.
I'll just test the mic. Can everyone hear me in the back there?
Louder.
Louder?
Make it louder.
Make it louder? How's that? Okay, so as Helen mentioned, thank you, Helen and Lindsay, for inviting me in. I am not Mary. So I wish her all the best. I hope she has a speedy recovery, and so keep her in your thoughts. And I also will mention I'm not used to this setup. I have some connectivity issues, so I don't have the full screen, but we'll manage to get through it. Also, I just want to add a little bit to what Helen mentioned. I'm a retired public school teacher. I've taught in several places in Montana. And I also work for the National Park Service as the interpreter for Park Service, for Park Ranger. And so I have that background. And very interested in researching Irish American groups in Butte from about 1900 to about 1925. So as Helen mentioned, I had a Carrie Johnson Fellowship for the Robert Emmet Literary Association. I'm also interested in the Friends of Irish Freedom, and I also have another project I'm working on. And so without talking about all that, I want to get to pretty much what I'll be discussing for today. So I appreciate all of you showing up, and I hope that this isn't, you were expecting Mary, so you have me. I mentioned I'm still getting oriented here. So I just wanted to start off with a couple slides here. And I apologize for not having a full screen. I had some connectivity issues. On the right, you have a walkway from Bray to Greystones, just south of Dublin. Has the Irish Sea right there. So I wanted to start off with that. And I have to do this manually. Also want to do a tip of the cap to Connie Cork. There's so many of you in here that have connections with Cork. And that's the Barra Peninsula. I can't use a laser here. Jim was telling me I should have brought a fishing pole in. That's Jim. But if you start in the left-hand corner, you'll go up Cork, Carrie, on up to the west of Ireland. So just real quickly, since you're sharing some of the morning with me, I just want to introduce myself briefly. My Irish ancestry is on both sides of the family. I'm going to talk about my father's, basically just as an introduction. I don't want to slight my mother's family, but you know, when you're researching, sometimes you find skeletons in closets. Well, on her side, they were Irish, Scots-Irish, and they were from Kentucky. And if you think that Montana is odd, you should try Kentucky. But anyway, up in the upper left-hand corner, my grandparents and aunts are from County Clare. The cottage up in the left is where my grandmother grew up before she came to the United States. It's still there, not in the family anymore, unfortunately, but a fellow does own it. Right across the road, down to the left, is where my grandfather grew up, and they both came to Illinois. This is the family that my grandfather left, never to see them again when he came to the United States. And then down in the right-hand corner, they came to Peoria, Illinois. He worked on the railroad. It's a big hub from St. Louis to Chicago. That's his union card. So my Irish ancestry and my, as Helen mentioned, my Irish citizenship comes through the foreign birth certificate. A couple things that my grandparents left in County Clare. The Burren in the left. On the right, the Cliffs of Moher, looking for Dublin going up. They grew up in Ennistimon, which is a market town in Clare. It's a beautiful little town if you ever get a chance. It's by Lahinge. Maybe you know about Lahinge. It's a big tourist area, but surfing and just, it's a great spot. But Ennistimon is about 2 miles from there. As I mentioned, I'm not from Butte. I came here to go to school in the 70s, the University of Montana, so go Grizz. I have to say that my wife Lorraine has a little bit of bobcat in her butt. But since MSU didn't have a pharmacy school, she had to finish at U of L. But anyway, Peoria, Illinois, it's about like Billings, size-wise. It's right on the Illinois River. Illinois River goes into the Mississippi down to New Orleans. That's where I grew up. I left when I was 18, basically. But 2 people that are famous from Peoria, maybe you're familiar with Richard Pryor, and folk singer, rock and roll person, Dan Fogelberg. So those are 2 famous. So I could go into some baseball people too, but I'll leave it at that. Interesting story about Richard Pryor. When I was growing up, most of the skits that he did were done right around the high school that I grew up, downtown Peoria. And he was not really respected by a lot. Now there's a statue in his honor. And Dan Fogelberg left Illinois, went to Colorado, and probably know the history with him. Okay, so I came to the University of Montana in the 70s. It was a wonderful experience for me. Had great professors. I want to shout out to Dr. Rich Clow. Taught me a lot about history and Native American studies, which really helped me quite a bit because I taught on 2 Native American reservations as well as some other places in Montana. And also a superintendent that I had at Big Hole National Battlefield, Al Schumeyer. I went to pick up my uniform for the Park Service because I was doing interpretation. And instead of getting my uniform, he gave me a stack of 15 books. And he said, if you're going to work here, you need to know about the Nez Perce and the story of Chief Joseph. And so that was a real eye-opener for me as I went through that with the Park Service. I worked other parks as well. Some are seasonal, because you know how teaching is. Eventually I went to Stevensville, Montana. I lived there for like 35 years. This was home base for us as we traveled around and worked in different places in Montana. I didn't move there because I loved it. There's a very inexpensive house there, which you will not find out. But my goal there was to hike every drainage in the Bitterroots, and so I pretty much was successful in doing that. That's a little bit about me, so thank you. A couple of things I want to mention now. Now we're going to kind of get serious. There's a little bit of nerd work in here, so I'll try to make it light. But I'm going to really focus on these groups here, especially as I mentioned, I'm very interested in this time period, 1900s to about 1925 in Butte. Several Irish American groups that were committed to obtaining Irish independence. So keep that in mind. And Mary was going to talk about the Butte Heart. I'm going to show how that heart in some of these groups was given to Ireland and how they were involved in the independence movement. The Clan and Gael, real quickly, they were one of the most powerful Irish American groups in that time period. They're in charge of the Robert Emmet Literary Association. And then eventually, Friends of Irish Freedom came from the Clan and Gael. And then later on, American Association for the Recognition of the Irish Republic, which is a mouthful. Right now I'm researching that last group. Maybe next time I'll be more prepared for that. I'm more productive in the wintertime for research. Okay, now how could all these groups survive? Where did the members come from? Well, if you look at the statistics here, there are over 4 million Americans who had been born in Ireland, or at least had one parent born. And a lot of them who came after the famine, or right around the 1900s, had a strong dislike and distrust of England. I think most of you know that. It ran pretty strong in my family. But it's also estimated that third and fourth generation Irish numbered as many as 20 million, or about 21% of the US population at that time. So you had a huge pool of people that you could draw from. Not everyone was going to be in these groups, as I'll mention. Also, a statistic by 1911, 1/3 of all born in Ireland were living elsewhere. County Mayo, up in the northwest there. In 1841 was, as you can see, almost 400,000. It was down to almost 200,000. Between 1820 and 1930, there were 4.5 million came to America, and most of you know this, 20 to 25% of Butte's population was Irish. So there, again, a huge pool of people to get into these organizations. And also I mentioned, I'm not doing anything with Ancient Order of Hibernians. That will come later, but I know there's a lot of research, and I do want to just congratulate them on the work that they've done, especially at the cemetery and other things, but I'm not focusing on them for today. Okay, to get over here, get in here. This is a copy of my aunt's passport. This is 1922. It's very fragile. The inside, just to show you what you would need at that time period to get here. So if you have relatives who came here at that time period, it's probably what they had. And on the inside, it said Free State. And I'll get into the Free State Treaty in a little bit here. My great aunt, that would be the inside of the passport. For those for those of you who travel, you know that that's not the detail you have. But that's Catherine Hogan right there. She went to Chicago, worked at the Belmont, which is a philosophical institution. Basically, they would bring speakers in. She was the person who would open the door, wait on the tables. But there's also a book written about the fortnightly, and there are at least 50 references to her in the book. So I think she actually ran the operation there. But anyway, here's some important events I want you to keep in mind. I'll come back to review these. Home Rule and the Irish Parliamentary Party declines. Easter Rising, World War I. I mean, can you imagine growing up in this time period? The Irish War for Independence, Irish Parliament, and Ireland declared independent, Irish Free State Treaty, and the Irish Civil War. So I'm going to touch on some of these as we get along. But this is a very interesting time period in Ireland. And so my attempt here today would show how Butte was tied into some of these events. So that's kind of the direction. I might also mention that one of the reasons I became interested in this, I started reading about all the famous people from Ireland who came here. I have a little brochure, by the way, that I'm working on of all the people who came here. So it's an all-star cast. You have Michael Davitt, you have Douglas Hyde, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington, Linda Kearns, Mary McSweeney, Constance Markiewicz, Margaret Pearse. Margaret Pearse sounds familiar. Her son was Patrick Pearse, signer of the proclamation. All these people came to Butte. I have 25 I've researched so far, and the well is extremely deep, so I'll keep on going right through that. Anyway, get back to the main topic here. I mentioned what was going on at this time period. I'm just going to say roughly 1900 because this, the Home Rule Party, which was the parliamentary party, really believed in hoping that Britain at some point in time would give Irish independence. So it was like a slow process. It's a constitutional way. We'd rely on the British Parliament to pass legislation, and it would be gradual, and eventually independence would happen. But it became kind of an issue because the British tried, well, there were 3 attempts to try Home Rule. 2 of them failed. World War I pretty much put the squash to the next one. So there was a lot of frustration because nothing was happening on that front. Charles Purnell Stewart and John Redmond were the 2 main people who were literally believed in working with the British Parliament. And of course he had a big scandal, which in today's political scene, that's nothing compared to what we see now. Probably where I'm going now. Okay, on the other side of that, you have the physical force group. John DuBois was from Ireland. Daniel Conlan was from New York. He was a New York State Supreme Court Justice. These two formed the Clan of Gael, going back to what I mentioned before. They're a very, pretty radical group. They really believed in the overthrow of the English Empire. So anytime England was involved in something, like the Boer War or World War I, they took the other side. So that's why you had a lot of pro-German sentiment before World War I. That changed, of course, when people started getting drafted. So anyway, physical force versus constitution. Kind of where we're going. And then also another player in this was Joseph McGarity from Philadelphia. And he sided eventually with Eamon de Valera in the story. I'll get to that in a bit. I want you to keep him in mind as well. Okay, so the Clan of Gael decided that there was a lot of British propaganda, and they were really upset that this propaganda was going to influence American politicians and the public and take away from the push for Irish independence, keep it away from the minds of the American public. So they decided they would have what they call the Irish Race Convention. This was held in New York. So the Clan of Gael, the Robert Emmets, worked hand in hand. This came to the Robert Emmets. I might mention that most of this material is from the Butte Public Archives. So they sent this out, asking for members to send to this conference. And more detail there. So here's a little bit more of a narrative. So the New York Clan of Gael said, send a delegate or delegates to the race convention to be held March 4th. This is a month, 7 weeks before the Easter Rising. The Butte branch of the Clan of Gael was the Robert Emmets. They took a committee of 5. They sent Brother 58. If you were on the cemetery tour the other day, the Emmets went by numbers. So I'd be Brother 10. Sorry, I need guys here because it wasn't women. You'd be Brother 14. And so they would send a delegate that way, although I do know who 58 was, eventually was able to do that. So they were sending these people out for this Irish Race Convention. It was held at the Hotel Astor. The Finland Hotel has some design which is similar to the Hotel Astor, the mansard roof. It was a French Empire style. And so I wanted to put that up, just that's kind of the first Butte connection here. So they all met at the Hotel Astor. And here's the purpose of Friends of Irish Freedom. So once again, Clan of Gael, Robert Emmet Literary Association, they were not a military group. They wanted to promote the cause of Ireland, assist any movement. They were very pro-American. They didn't want to get labeled as pro-German. They focused on fundraising and education. So a lot of the speakers that I mentioned in that brochure, they all were sponsored by various groups, AOH as well, and they all worked together, these groups did. They wanted to counter British influence, they were neutral, and they were very loyal to the U.S. So all this information's come back to Butte, send the delegates, we're going to send these people, and we're going to start up with Friends of Irish Freedom here in Butte and also Montana. Okay, so this just wasn't a willy-nilly thing. This was all sent out from New York to Butte. This is all in the archives, by the way. How to set up a branch. It's very organized. If any of you have been on boards, foundations or whatnot, you follow Robert's Rules of Order. So it's all pretty straightforward as to how business is conducted. Okay, so these are from newspaper articles. Enthusiastic meeting to form a new Irish society. 1,000 people sign up to be Friends of Irish Freedom, just like that. Attention, meeting at Hibernian Hall, and they share that hall with Hibernians, by the way. And I don't see how you could turn that down. Every man of Irish blood, you need to show up. So we have the Friends going, we've got an organization going here. Now there were 4 Friends of Irish Freedom. I only have information for Patrick Pearse. There's a Thomas Ashe, which I'm researching right now. There was a Thomas Maher and the Phil Sheridan. So Anaconda had 1, we had 3. You probably all know Jeremiah Lynch. Here's the articles and basically incorporation for the group, and adopted June 18th, 1916. So that would have been roughly almost 2 months after the Easter Rising. Here's this group. Now, you looked at what they were supposed to do, and you became a member by being introduced by someone, a letter. So here's Father Hannon from St. Mary's. He was one of the most radical priests I think I have ever read about. Here's some cards, right here. So you nominated someone, you were vetted. I've known him for 3 years, 7 years. Some of them say I've known him for a lifetime. These are really cool because later on I'll show you the addresses of these people so you know where they live, all up in this area. Okay. Of this initial group, this was, Robert Emmet's were men only. The reason I like Friends of Irish Freedom is egalitarian. Men and women served in this. And in fact, the women had some pretty important positions, especially like treasurer. 76 members, 41 were women, 50 were Irish born, mostly 1,200 youth members between the four. But the one I'm focusing on is Patrick Pearse. Nationwide, 100,000. Okay, so they got their thing going. Here's some more membership. This is a little hard to read here, but Montana right there, comparison to the other states. This is all from Michael Drewley, who's done research on this topic. Here's a little bit more. This is the only information I could get. 62 nominations, 45 born in Ireland, 8 from the US, 19 minors, 15 housewives, 3 seamstresses, 3 blacksmiths, and 3 assistant priests. Okay, one of the biggest nominators of people for Irish freedom is this woman on the left. I wish it was a better picture. Mary Cosgrove. If anyone in this audience knows anything about her, I would love to know that, because it would be awesome to know. But there's Eamon de Valera right there. We had 2 pictures kind of in the house as a kid growing up. One was JFK, and one was Eamon de Valera. And you could also transfer. So here's a form to transfer. If you're going to Leadville or Seattle, you want to keep up with the group, you can do that. Okay, so they have the organization going. Then all of a sudden the Easter Rising happens. This, at that time, was Sackville, it's O'Connell Street now. You see the spire? That was in honor of Horatio Nelson, who was a British military naval officer. Well, about the 60s came, a lot of people were sick of British monuments. So during the 60s, the IRA blew that up. They didn't completely destroy it, but knocked the head off of it. And that head found its way around different places in Ireland. I am basically a music person. If you're familiar with the Dubliners, Luke Kelly, Ronnie Drew, John Sheehan, the only living member left of the Dubliners, that was on stage at one of their concerts. But anyway, get more serious here. We know about the Easter Rising. We also know about the people who were executed, the reading of the Irish Proclamation. But the Friends of Irish Freedom started an Irish Relief Fund for the survivors, the families of the prisoners, and people who have been killed during the Easter Rising. So this is another thing going on. And if you had any doubt about donating, all you had to do is look at that poster that was an advertisement. That's Conley, James, who was seriously injured during the Easter Rising and could not stand at all. And the story goes is that at Kilmainham in the courtyard, if you've ever been to Kilmainham, it's brutal, but it's very informative. He was executed in the courtyard and put in a chair so that he could be killed. So if you wanted to donate money, you'd take a look at that. Of course, you would give money for that, but there was also other little things too. There were dances, plays, music, all types of things to bring money, and Butte was one of them. The Butte goal, I think, was about $6,000. They raised $2,600, which the purchasing power right now is like $73,000. You know, you're looking at 1916. So they were involved in the Irish Relief Fund. And why? Well, you can take a look at statistics, about 500 deaths, you know, as we go down. But the important thing is the 3,500 taken prisoner and sent to internment camps. And those internment camps, 2 of them in particular, one was in Wales, and then also Kilmainham. Those aren't the only 2. So there was really concern about the families and the prisoners. So Butte's Heart, what I'm getting to, was very generous in donating. They weren't the only place, but they were very generous in their donations, and so raised money for that. Now, I mentioned Butte propaganda, or propaganda against Ireland. You might think, well, you know, this is the Butte Minor. We all have our own feelings about the Easter Rising. We were told a certain story growing up. But the Butte Minor, it was a revolt. It was seditious. It was futile, misguided. So this is what the Butte public was reading. So you can see that the propaganda was pretty strong against Ireland's independence and also against this uprising in Dublin. I just wanted to point that out. There were other newspapers in town too, but I focused on 3. I thought this was a little bit, would show you more. John Redmond, I mentioned at the beginning, mercy for the great mass of the unfortunate dupes involved. That's from one of your main leaders in Ireland. So they had a tough road to go. These are some photos, propaganda again, I believe, the real sufferers from the rebellion, showing these kids, and then 2 women in Dublin gaily walking along with wood, having a great time when the city was, that particular part of Dublin was in ruins. So here we go, the Irish Relief Fund. Friends of Irish Freedom for the relief and suffering of Ireland. Sorry about the break there. But it was for the distress from the recent rebellion and military rule. So raising money for that. This is out of the newspaper article. Subscriptions taken for the relief fund. This is what the Butte public was reading in the local newspapers. All this was posted. It's pretty awesome when you start getting into it. Subscriptions. Yesterday's meeting of the Butte sympathizers, $976. And the pledges, this is all posted in the paper. It's pretty transparent. And I'll leave it at that, just to show you that the public was getting this information. And then, as I mentioned, how was the money raised? Well, here's a relief fund concert, the auditorium here in Butte, a memorial mass was given. So there's all kinds of things that were happening to raise these funds. It's really not too much different than what you might think of if you're trying to raise funds for a small group or organization. Once again, here's some more. Irish appeal to generous Butte Heart, Irish relief dance, all types of things encouraging people. Here's the results. So nationwide, $100,000. Today's money, that's almost 10 million. Butte, at least, I know there was more, but at least 2,500, and that's equal to over $75,000. So it was very significant, and Butte was pulling its weight, which I'll show you, we actually outperformed many states in this country. And then here's some more. It was all transparent, you could read about it. Okay, so they raised money. Now let's have another Irish Race Convention. This one's in Philadelphia. There was one in Buenos Aires. There was one in Australia. All types of places. But anyway, this was at Philadelphia, the Academy of Music. Never been there, but beautiful shot. And then also the Armory. That's where the events were held. Okay, so what were they up to? Supposedly this is the greatest gathering our people ever had. There were 5,000 delegates. And the Friends of Irish Freedom went from 6,000 to 70,000. So this particular group also was connected to Butte. It was to fund work in America for countering British and American propaganda. There's nothing in this literature that would suggest that it was for sending guns over or for sending arms. It was for propaganda and education, anti-propaganda. And so Butte was part of this as well. Advocate, of course, for freedom, but as I highlight, which we'll get to in a little bit here, the funds were to stay in America, but to go to Ireland. So you can imagine there would be a little interesting thing about that. I mentioned Friends of Irish Freedom. They really wanted to appeal to the patriotic American. So take a look at the dates. 1776, Revolutionary War, War of 1812 with England, Mexican War, Civil War, Spanish-American, and World War I. So there's a lot of patriotism, but America, remember what you owe to Ireland. So you had this constant thing going on all the time about trying to remember that Ireland is still in the midst of independence here. Here's some more information. You probably recognize James E. Murray. He was Senator Murray. This man had an incredible place in all of this, and I'll talk about him in a second. Of course, he was an FDR ally, but before he was a senator, he was also an attorney, all types of things. But anyway, he was in charge, appointed to take care of this particular raising of funds. Okay, so we're collecting money again. Okay, sorry about that screen. But anyway, Montana raised $14,426, which is equal to $233,000. Butte raised $12,000. Billings is a distant second at $414, but I think Anaconda's in there. I couldn't find an Anaconda, so I apologize if you got Anaconda raised. I know you were second. I really do. It's just that Billings was the one that was mentioned. On August 19th, the Victory Drive closes with a total over $1 million raised. That's $18 million. But it was to stay here, so keep that in mind. Because when De Valera comes here, he'd like that money. Okay, so here's an interesting thing to make you feel proud about Montana. Michael Durley collected data on 37 states. So there's Montana total. Montana outperformed 26 states. New York collected that much money, 10 million. But our population at that time was 549,000. So I thought that was very interesting, outperforming 26 states. The grand total was over $1 million, which is about 18 million in purchasing power for money to stay here. And then, just if you're wondering for all you accountants out there, it was audited. I found that. The teacher in me was like, I love it, because in researching, I really like to do 3 sources. I don't like to just do one. You gotta have that stuff I could say stuff, but that one was like, yeah, okay, now I get it. That money was really raised. Okay, so let's go to Ireland for a second, because now it's going to get a little complex. You know that England ruled Ireland. Ireland sent legislators to Britain to be part of Parliament. Ireland has an election. 73 out of 105 seats go to De Valera Sinn Féin party. If you follow Irish politics now, you know Sinn Féin is basically, I'm going to say, on the rise. They have ties back to this. But anyway, and also Sinn Féin was the political arm of the IRA. So there's a lot that they're kind of working through right now. But anyway, they had a majority of people. De Valera decides, let's just form our own government. Okay, remember now, England rules Ireland. Let's form our own government. That's why I call it a counter-government. That same day, 2 police officers are killed by IRA volunteers, a Tipperary. Roughly, the Irish War for Independence started. Where's Butte these days? Okay, so De Valera, you start a new government, you need money. Who else will you come to? The United States. I'm not saying that Ireland did not raise money. They have their own bond program, but De Valera wanted to tap into the United States. Does everyone know about Eamon De Valera? I think he's just an incredible politician, president. Just his biography is pretty wild. So they formed their first parliament, the Dáil. Michael Collins, De Valera in the center, Arthur Griffin. This is a pretty important bunch. So this is the first parliament who's running a counter-government. But on the other hand, here's the commandement. The women were involved here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'm still researching that right now. There was a commandement here in Butte. I'm not quite there yet. This is an incredible group of women. Some of the women I mentioned on the brochure were commandement. They were very radical. Irish women group committed to Irish independence. I put that up there as a contrast. Okay, so you need new money. What do you need it for? You have a government still that's a counter-government. I'm really surprised England didn't do anything about this. They waited 9 months before they actually did anything. So you need money for courts, police, as I mentioned, return to America to raise $10 million. This also coincided with that victory drive I was telling you about, which had that big pot of money in it. And here's Garrity, De Valera, and Du Bois, who had a complete falling out over this big pot of money that De Valera wanted that was held in the relief fund. Friends of Irish Freedom eventually stood down. They gave money to De Valera, $100,000 to get the bond drive going, $25,000 for De Valera, $100,000. Most importantly here, they got the Friends of Irish Freedom subscription list, 75,000 members. Now think about that if you're running a political campaign and you get that many, well, this is a small number to compare to what they get now, but think about what you could do. You have access to the membership's names, addresses, and that. So that was also something that happened here. De Valera, when he was here, started out there. There's Anaconda, Butte, Helena. He went to Helena, gave a talk at the legislature, and spent some time here in Butte, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. But anyway, you're raising money for a bond. So each state appointed a chairperson. You identified cities in each state to canvass for raising money. The chair appointed a city chairperson. The canvassing was done street by street, block by block, and house by house. So this is what was going on in Butte. People going around asking, would you like to buy a bond to help with Irish independence? Here's our friend, James Murray. James Murray and Evan De Valera were pretty tight, from what I understand. He was the Montana chair for the bond drive. The goal was 10 million. They did collect almost 6. That's 77 million. The Butte goal was 100,000. 107,000 was raised. That's 1.5 million in today's money. Came from Butte Art. And then a little bio there for Murray. You got one of these little bond certificates. I'm coming up to something really exciting here. I have to control myself here. But the bond drive had 300,000 subscribers, and 1,200 of them were from Montana, mostly from Butte. I love Missoula, but sorry, didn't see much. Here's the bond drive. This is all transparent. Here in bond drive, meets with success. Says the state will go over the top. Murray's just scattered through all of this here. Anaconda, there you go. They were in on it too. Contribution to the Irish Fund, listed names. Irish bond drive closed in Butte. There was an area wedding. I love these articles. Irish alderman of New York said it was a scam. Says it's time to quit such cheap handling for votes and tell the truth. So there was always going to be some opposition there. Here's what I got really excited about. When you're researching and you come across something like this is a gold mine. If you have any relatives here in this audience that grew up at this time period, I have a hard copy you can look out later on. This is a list, a partial list of all the Butte subscribers to this bond drive. This was the most fascinating discovery that I could ever find in my life, I have to say. I guess I'm still talking about it. Larry's quite tired of me talking about it. But anyway, let's talk about it for a second. Talk about people power. $10 subscribers made up 36%, $20 subscribers, 25, 50, on down. 71% were 25 or less, which is 31,000 of the 44,000 they were trying to get. Down there on the bottom, $10 is 180, 25 is 450, 50 is about 900. So think about the wages at that time. And if these are miners, housewives, seamstresses, you know. There were a few high rollers, not many though. John Ryan was one of them. But by and large, it wasn't the case. Okay, so public education was also part of this. Hannah Sheehy Scuffington, with her husband Francis, he was murdered by the British troops a few days after the Easter Rising. Hannah Sheehy Skeffington came to Butte 2 times, and just was in the Women's Workers Union. She was a suffragette in Ireland, and she was definitely here to talk about the Easter Rising the first time, and then the second time was more about the Free State Treaty. So I want to get out, I know money's important, but public education is also very important, because you can bring people in and get the real story of what's going on in Ireland. They were coming to Butte to give the Butte population the real story. Also, Liam Mellows. Now, Liam Mellows was in the Easter Rising. I know there's a lot of newspapers and writing and this about Dublin, but in Galway, there were different places in Ireland that the Rising was going to happen. And Liam Mellows was in Galway. He was De Valera's advance man, and so he came to the United States, but also came to Butte. He didn't want to talk about the Easter Rising too much, but eventually did share some details about what had happened there. Now, I mentioned De Valera and Conlan. It's tense. De Valera really wants that money from the Irish Victory Fund. It could go a long way toward helping the Irish Parliament. So he starts his own group, which is the American Association for the Recognition of the Irish Republic. This is the group I'm researching right now. So I have some information I can share with you about that if I have the time. If there's any question about whose side Butte was on, was it the Supreme Court Judge Conlan or was it De Valera? If you look at the headline here, it was De Valera. De Valera arrived at Front Street. He came up Wyoming Park to the courthouse. Kids were singing songs. He went and stayed up in Finland, went down to Hepburn Field at that time, which is the ballpark, at 2nd and Oregon, spoke to 10,000 people. If you've ever gone down there, the first time I read about that, I went and stood in the middle of that field and just looked around. It kind of actually gave me the chills. I guess he was having laryngitis issues during the speech, according to the article, and people were leaning in, and every time he said Irish independence, there was like a huge so, but to have him come here and to have that reception, which was a Butte reception for sure. So James Murray, he became Montana state president of the AARIR. Just put that in there because I'm so tired of talking about American Association. You get tongue-tied. But Murray had such a successful career as a senator. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was over 30 years, I believe, that he was in the U.S. Senate. And he was an FDR ally. And really, when you think about it, back then, there was Walsh, there was Murray, Stevensville, there was Metcalf. And I can't forget, just so many early Butte politicians that really cared about Irish independence. And so Murray was one of them. Pretty nice photo of him. Again, I apologize for the line now. I accessed this at the archives, but it's also in a display case at the Chateau. You can go in and look at it. It's very fortunate to be able to pull that out. And this is an appreciation to James Murray for everything he did for Irish independence. There's letters in here. They're very heartfelt. A couple of them, sorry about that one was kind of faded, but congratulating him for standing up for De Valera when Conlan was really trying to trash him. In fact, they tried to send De Valera back to Ireland. There was a trial held by the clan of Gael in New York to send De Valera back. So he came here. A couple other little letters here. Stuff with this. No better or more qualified lieutenant in the whole of the American Republic. That's Eamon De Valera complimenting someone from Butte, which I think is pretty good. Murray was the 3rd vice president of this particular organization, and so he worked closely with De Valera. Here's some more information about that. I'm kind of mindful of time here. Here's an application if you lived in Butte. Fill that out, send it in. You're pretty much good to go. More public education. Mary McSweeney, her brother Terrence. Mary McSweeney came to Butte on St. Patrick's Day. Terence was the mayor of Cork. He was on a 73-day hunger strike. He was and died. Of course, she came to Butte and told that story. This is just a small sample of the people who came here. I know I'm short on time, so I won't get into all of them, but they all brought these stories from Ireland. So I guess my main point is that they kept the idea of Irish independence in the Butte mind. Okay, here's a follow-up. We go way back now to when I got started. Irish Relief Fund, just over 75,000. You can just kind of go down the Butte columns here. 18 million, 77 million. It's pretty impressive when you look at the figures. And just a couple final thoughts here. There were successful fundraising activities to help Ireland. They kept the Butte Irish community informed about conditions in Ireland by bringing prominent Irish politicians and activists to Butte. It was an egalitarian organization, which for that time was really impressive. And it was an important participant for its size in comparison to larger American cities. There was a master's thesis that I wrote a while ago, I forget the fellow's name, and so I'm going to be using this, but the title of it was The Ties That Bind. And I thought that was such a cool thing to say that connects Butte to Ireland. And when you think about the ties, how do we connect with Ireland now? Well, we have hurling, which is part of the Gaelic Association. We have the twinning with the Butte Archives and Allihies. We have this unbelievable Irish festival here. And so there's all types, and I'm sure you can think of some other ways that are connected other than your lingus. My favorite. I want to thank a couple things here. The Butte Public Archives. If you've never been there, you should. I've spent countless hours in there. The Robert Emmet Literary Association was a labor of love. There was these big stacks of books. University of Montana Mansfield, they're a little bit stricter, but they're good. And then also, Helen mentioned, I do a radio program on Butte Community Radio Station, KBMF. If you've never, if you go to the courthouse, there's a little neon sign in there, you might think it's something else. But, and I've done that program for about 9 years now. And it's Celtic, I look at the threads of Irish music through Scotland, Canada, the United States, down to Louisiana, France, and other places as well. And then it's called Rock Your Bill to Dublin. And it's also the Harp Without the Crown, which profiles many of these people that are in this brochure. Now that was a pretty quick run through, and I know I want to get out of here to set up for the next, but if you had any questions, I'm going to be here if you want to ask, or we have a couple minutes left. If anyone wants to ask a question, I'm not a PhD candidate, but fine. And if you ask and I don't know, I'll find out. So does anyone out there want to?
John, I have a question.
Sure.
How long did you research this topic?
I'd say between the three of them, I've spent the better part of maybe 4.5 years. Yeah, and Lindsay has been very helpful. Anytime I want something, and Aubrey as well, but I would say continuous. I just want to mention one thing too about my hometown, Peoria, Illinois. It had an Irish population, it's very much like Butte. The German population was the dominant, and it was Irish. I would love to go back there and sit there and do something for that group that is similar to what I've done here. I can't find anything about that area. So that's another project. But like I mentioned, the new group with Double Era is the one that I'm actually interested in researching the most. Yes, thank you.
John, when the Irish came into the country, into the U.S., do they need to declare where they wanted to go from there?
Well, thank you. This is a really strange story. So when my grandfather came to Ireland, I got the ship manifest from Ellis Island. So, and they declared where they were going and who asked them and where they were from. The very next people underneath him, guess where they were going? Butte, Montana. Oh, I wish you would have talked to them. I wouldn't trade my childhood for anything, but I just thought, but yes, they had generally, if you look at that, it was declared My particular situation with my grandfather was that my grandmother had O'Brien's cousins, and they had come to Illinois, sent word back, and so they were kind of like sponsors. Yeah, but I would say, and then as you probably know, if you have ancestry, Cove is where mine went out. First time I went to Cove, south of Cork, I was in tears because that's where they left, and in this particular case, they never came back again, or he never came back again. Yes?
You mentioned that group that wanted to throw the brother out of the
Yes.
U.S. and back to Ireland. Were they affiliated with Collins in the Civil War?
That's another good question. And you know the conflict between the two. There's really not too much information about that, how Devoy felt about Collins. I haven't run across that. But Devoy was very strong on the fact that well, there's some great quotes. De Valera said that there's not room in this country for him and Frank Copeland. You know, there's not, it's two, you know, and then they wanted him out. And Devoy was saying, well, these people come over from Ireland, they know more than we. And so, but I didn't see much about Collins. I really couldn't tell you where they stood on that. But that's something I can definitely look into if you're interested. Yeah. All right. Well, I think my time is about up, so I want to thank all of you. I hope there wasn't too much history, but we have to talk about the historical context before you can understand Butte and how it had these ties with some of the money and then also some other things. So maybe next time I'll have some more information about the American Association and we'll just kind of go from there. All right, thank you.
Thank you, John. And he was such a trooper to step in at the last minute. Thank you very much. So, can I get a show of hands? We're just trying to figure out if we need a bigger space. Obviously, it's standing room only. A show of hands for people that are coming because it's on Saturday rather than Friday. Can I ask anybody that's coming specifically because we're putting this on Saturday rather than a Friday? Could you hold your hands up so we know? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then if anybody wants to scoot in, because we got maybe some seats on the end. And buckets by each doorway, if you care to throw a few dollars in, I appreciate that. And they'll buckets